This lesson is simplifying scientific notations. Here we are multiplying two scientific notations. So 7 times 2 will be the first part, and then the exponent go together, which is the second part. One more time, 7 times 2 will be the first part, and then this exponent and this exponent, they go together. Okay, so 7 times 2 gives me 14. Now if you remember, in exponent we can add here because the base are the same. So -1 plus -3 gives me -4. One more time, here we add powers because we are in the same base. Okay, so -1 plus -3, -4. Okay, however, in scientific, make sure that it is from 1 to 9. This is 14. 14 is bigger than 9. So now we have to make this 14 somewhere in between 1 and 9. So what we do is we make this 14 and turn it into 1.4. Now if you remember, in changing scientific notations, if there is a decimal, you start at the decimal. Here there is no decimal, so we start in the back. One more time, there is no decimal here, so we start in the back. So move 1 to the left side. So that's what I have here. I move 1 to the left side, and the first number is between 1 and 9, so we are okay with that. And so the answer now becomes 1.4. Again, we change this 14 into 1.4. Why? Because 14 is bigger than 9, and we need it between 1 to 9. So now 14 becomes 1.4. Again, where the decimal come from? If there is no decimal, we start at the back. Okay? If there is no decimal, we start at the back of the 4 and then move 1 over to the left side. So now it becomes 1.4. 1.4 is in between 1 and 9. Okay? However, we did move 1 time, so therefore I need to add this 1 power in. We did move 1 time, so we need to add this 1. Okay? Next, this -4, we didn't do anything to it, so we bring it straight down. However, we can add these two power together, so I have 1 plus -4 gives me -3. And this is our final answer. So multiplying two scientific notations and becomes, this is the answer. Okay, again, 7 times 2 is the first part. This exponents and this exponent go together. 7 times 2 is 14. -1 plus -3 gives me -4. Now we need to change this 14 into between 1 and 9 because 14 is bigger than 9. So we move the decimal. However, since there is no decimal, we start from the back. Like what I have here, start from the back because there is no decimal. So move 1 over, becomes 1.4. Now where does this 1 come from? Because I moved the decimal 1 time, so I have to add it in. One more time. Where did this 1 come from? I move 1 time, so therefore because I move 1 time, I have to add it in. Okay, so that's where the 1 comes from. Again, this 1 came from moving the decimal 1 time. Okay, so therefore I have to include that 1 move. And then finally, 1.4, 1 plus -4 gives me -3. And that's my final answer. Okay, so here is another example. Now this time it's same thing, but it's written a little bit different. Instead of writing out like this, I write it square. So this square means there are 2 of the same thing. One more time. You see up here in the first example, it is written out. It is separated by each scientific notation. Here I wrote it square. That means I have to have two of these. Okay, so here's the one, here's the second one. So it is the same thing, but it is written twice. Okay, because of this number, we have to write this twice. So this is the first one, and this is the second one. Okay, so repeat the same thing twice, because that's what this 2 means. Now, you can multiply them just like what we did in example 1. So 5.5 to the first part, this -5 to the second part. Okay, so again, 5.5, the first part, and then -5 to the second. Okay, so we use our calculator. 5.5 times 5.5 comes out to be 30.25. And then this -5 and this -5, we add them together. So -5 plus -5 gives me -10. Okay, again, scientific notations, the first number has to be from 1 and 9. So okay, from 1 to 9. This is 30, so we have to make it smaller because 30 is bigger than 9. Okay, so here we have a decimal, so that's why we have to start at the decimal. If you remember from the first example, since there is no decimal, we start from the back. Here we do have a decimal, so this is where we start. Again, if there is a decimal, this is where we start. Okay, so move 1 over, like what I have down here, move 1 over. So now it becomes 3 point. So and 3 is between 1 and 9, so we are okay with scientific notations. So the final answer comes out to be 3.025. Since I move 1 time, I move the decimal 1 time, I need to include this 1 in. Again, where does this 1 come from? Because I moved this decimal 1 time. Okay, so then finally I have 3.025, which I have here, and then 1 plus -10 gives me -9. So this is my final answer. Okay, so the first example is when it is written out. The second example, instead of written it out, I wrote it like this, where there's a power 2. This power 2 means I'm going to multiply this twice. Okay, same thing, but I have to do it twice. The same example, but I'm making it, I rewrite it as 2 times. Okay, so same procedure with the first example and the second example, just multiply them. Okay, and then the last example, where what do I do when I am dividing scientific notation? So same thing, 3.2 divided by 7, separate this part into the first one, and then separate this into the second one. Okay, so in divisions, same thing as multiply. Separate this as the first part, and then the exponent for the second part. Okay, now use our calculator. 3.22 divided by 7 give us 0.46. And then in division, if you remember the exponent power in division we subtract powers. Okay, so -3 minus -6. Again, this -3 because it belongs to the problem. This -6 belongs to the problem. Where does this negative come from? Because we are in dividing powers. Okay, we are in dividing powers, so we have to subtract. Okay, so again, 3.22 divided by 7 gives me 0.46, and then negative and negative gives me positive, which I did on this side, and then -3 plus 6 gives me +3. So that's where the +3 comes from. So this part right here becomes +3. Again, this number right here, the first number cannot be a 0. It has to be between 1 and 9. So now I move this decimal. Again, follow the rule. If I have a decimal, this is where I start. Okay, if I have a decimal, that's where I start. So move this decimal to the right 1 time. Okay, and that comes out to be 4.6. So since the first number is 4, 4 is between 1 and 9, from 1 to 9, so we're okay. So 4.6, and since I move 1 time, Therefore, I need to put that -1 in. And why is it negative? Because I went from small to a bigger number. From a small number to a bigger number. And since because I move one time, becomes -1. Okay, one more time. Since I move from a small number to a big number, that's where the negative comes from. Where the 1 come from? Because I move one time. Okay, and then 4.6, add the power, -1 plus 3 gives me +2. So this is the answer for dividing scientific notation for this example. Okay, so be very, very careful of the simplifying scientific notations.